this is the second installment in this Zarathustra Summer series. And for this part, I'm just going to go over the prologue, or at least the first half of the prologue. So, as we've seen before, Zarathustra starts off kind of on top of this mountain in an isolated existence. He's been there for about 10 years. And he's kind of got this need to, I suppose, communicate and to interact with people, kind of emerging from his isolated or kind of monastic almost state of existence. And he's described as having an overflowing cup. His kind of cup of wisdom is overflowing, and obviously it's too full. He needs to share. He needs to get something out. So he starts to descend from his peak on top of the mountain, and there's a lot of there's a lot of imagery in the prologue to do with walking on a tightrope, or to do with descending, or ascending, descending, tightrope walking. We'll get into the tightrope walking in the next segment, but this part is more of a descent from the mountaintop. And on the way, he meets a hermit. So he meets someone like him, I suppose, another kind of isolated individual. And he's going down the mountain, and his aim is to get to a town, to the townspeople. And the other hermit that he meets along the way, when he bumps into him, has a brief discussion with him. The other hermit has a very kind of opposing views and opposing goals of what he's doing. So this other hermit isn't interested in going down to the townspeople. He's going to stay in his spot. And noticeably, his spot is not as high up as Zarathustra's spot. Zarathustra's spot seems to be the top of the mountain, and this other hermit seems to be kind of like halfway between the townspeople and the top. So it's on his descent. He meets him, and this other hermit doesn't want anything to do with people, and he sort of warns Zarathustra against going down to the people. And he says, "They are mistrustful of hermits and do not believe that we come to give. Do not go to men, but stay in the forest. Go rather to the animals. Why will you not be as I am, a bear among bears, a bird among birds?" And what does the saint do in the forest? Asks Zarathustra. The saint answered, "I make songs and sing to them, and when I make songs, I laugh, weep, and mutter. Thus I praise God." So, on Zarathustra's descent towards the town people, he kind of gets a warning of this other hermit who is saying, "Don't go to people. They don't trust people like us. They're going to be hostile to you, mistrustful of you." I think he, at one stage, says that they're going to think of what you're trying to do for them as a kind of an act of thievery. They're going to think that you're taking something from them, which we'll get back to in like a few later sections. But he's warning them against the reaction of the townspeople, basically. And then Zarathustra kind of takes the warning and he keeps going. And he basically says, this old saint has not heard yet that God is dead. So the difference between Zarathustra and this hermit is that Zarathustra understands that God is dead, where this saint doesn't. So this saint's position, remaining somewhere in the mountain alone, just being with God, is seen as kind of stupid, basically, to Zarathustra, because it's something somebody would do if they hadn't known God is dead, basically. And this is interesting because, you often hear a story or like a fairy tale or a, kind of folk tale of something you would typically tell children, for example, in order to keep them from wandering off into the forest or wandering into the mountain to get lost, which is like, beware of the animals or of the beasts or of the the dangerous things out there in the mountain or in the forest. stay in the town. But this is quite the opposite. This is like hermits warning each other. Beware of people. Beware of the townspeople. Do not go towards them. Stay here with the animals. And of course, the relationship to animals actually in the prologue is very interesting as well, because it expresses um, these hermits are always quite alienated from people, but seem to get on with animals much better, be it more at home with animals. Which is interesting because, of course, we have this ontological kind of hierarchy, basically, which is also running through this, where you have animals, humans, gods, and obviously, the declaration of God is dead. That hierarchy then suddenly becomes obscure. So suddenly you have like holy men who identify more with animals than they do with humans. So it's like they're identifying with something which is lower on the spiritual hierarchy, not with something higher. So you have this really, you've kind of got a kind of an ontological mess of like people who are isolated from each other, living together, relating to animals. Not, there's you can see basically the kind of confusion that God being dead is expressing in these little encounters with other people. So anyway, there's also a theme here of descent. Descent from a point of elevation or a point of wisdom. Zarathustra starts at the top of the mountain, and he's got a cup full of wisdom. And as he goes down the mountain, he first meets a hermit who I suppose respects on some level, because he's kind of similar to him. But the hermit doesn't know that God is dead. So the more descent we go, the more ignorance we meet. And obviously, this is very much reminiscent of Plato's cave. Descending into the cave, you meet people who are looking at these shadows. You encounter ignorance, basically. So next is when Zarathustra actually engages with the townspeople, and he gets to this town, and he basically just starts immediately preaching the Übermensch, the Superman. So he says, "I teach you the Superman. Man is nothing that should be overcome. Sorry, man is something that should be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? All creatures hitherto have created something beyond themselves. And do you want to be the ebb of this great tide and return to the animals rather than overcome man? What is ape to men? A laughingstock or a painful embarrassment? And just so shall men be to the Superman, a laughingstock or a painful embarrassment." So, and also he says, "You've made your way from worm to man, and much in you is still worm. Once you were apes, and even now, man is more of an ape than any ape." So again, like he's playing around with these again, the kind of spiritual hierarchy, ontological hierarchy of animal, man, divine entity, God. He's kind of playing around with it the whole time. He's like, even now, man is more of an ape than an ape. It's like, what does that mean? So, obviously, the Superman is a sort of attempt to reevaluate a certain spiritual hierarchy after the death of God. It gives humans a point of which to ascend to, right? To use our kind of our imagery of mountaineering and mountain climbing, it gives men something to ascend to now that their godly ascension has basically failed or gone away or whatever. And he also, with this, sort of preaches a kind of life affirming need to remain true to the earth. So he says, the Superman is the meaning of the earth. Let your will say the Superman shall be the meaning of the earth. I entreat you, my brothers, remain true to the earth, and do not believe those who speak to you of superterrestrial hopes. They are poisoners, whether they know it or not. They are despisers of life, atrophying and self-poisoned men, of whom the earth is weary, let them be gone. So, and then he speaks a bit about the body. He says, once the soul looked contemptuously upon the body, and then this contempt was the supreme good. The soul wanted the body lean, monstrous, famished. So the soul thought to escape from the body and from the earth. Oh, this soul was itself lean, monstrous, and famished, and cruelty was the delight of the soul. So he's sort of, on one hand, preaching a point of ascension, a point of arrival, a point of overcoming, something which is obviously vertical and hierarchical, and an improvement, a sort of a betterment. But he's doing this, trying to liberate this, I suppose, tendency towards overcoming, this desire to overcome. He's trying to sort of move it away from what we might call the kind of excessive Gnostic tendencies of hating the body, of being suspicious of the body, poisoning the body, and so on, of having a soul that wants to simply liberate itself from earth. And so you could, I suppose, accuse Nietzsche of a kind of hedonism. Is he kind of rejecting spirit, rejecting ethical reality for just a mere pleasure principle or a mere earthly delight? And I think that's clearly not the case, because this is a kind of almost monastic figure, right? This is a kind of recluse. This is a kind of a deeply pious figure who's coming down to preach. He's not, there's a lot more earthly delights in the town than there is up and alone on a mountain. So I don't think you can posit Zarathustra's loyalty to earth as being in any way a kind of like cheap pleasure-seeking hedonism. I think it's more of an attempt to motivate and to let's say cultivate that tendency and that urge to ascend, in a way which doesn't fall prey to these kind of body-hating, earth-hating tendencies, which he obviously was very critical of. So in the next section, we're going to see the townspeople's reaction to Zarathustra's message and his aims. And as you might predict, they're not very friendly. They're not very good. But we'll get to that in the next section. So